If you want to join Thanksgiving, come wash the dishes. My daughter-in-law's voice, sharp and unyielding, cut through the phone line. Enjoy, I simply replied, a quiet defiance in my tone. Oh, the sweet irony. Later, when she saw the photos of my beautiful Swiss villa, my phone practically vibrated off the table. I'm so glad you're here with me. Please, stay with my story to the very end, and if you feel like sharing, do comment the city you're watching from. It'd warm my heart to see how far my little tale has traveled. The phone rang on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was happily engrossed in my favorite cooking show, the one where they create those exquisite, elaborate desserts you only dream of trying. The sudden ring shattered the peace, a jarring sound that sliced right through my calm. Hello, Mabel. Marin's voice was just as I expected. Cold, all business, no warmth at all. She spoke my name as if it left a bad taste in her mouth. Oh, hello dear, I managed, quickly muting the television and sitting up straighter in my favorite armchair, the one that's seen better days but still feels like home. How are you? How's David? She didn't answer. She never did. Instead, she launched right into what I now see was a perfectly planned little humiliation. I'm calling about Thanksgiving, she announced, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. If you want to come this year, you can come early and help with the dishes. The cooking and serving will be handled by people who actually know what they're doing. Her words hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened, that familiar ache spreading right through my ribs. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. People who actually know what they're doing. As if 37 years of cooking for my late husband and son meant nothing. As if all those countless meals I'd prepared with so much love and care were just amateur attempts. I see, I whispered, my voice barely there. Good. Come at noon sharp. We'll be eating at 4 o'clock, so you'll have plenty to clean up afterward. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her smug satisfaction through the phone. Oh, and Mabel, don't bring any of your contributions. We have everything covered. Then, click. The line went dead. She'd hung up without a goodbye, leaving me sitting there, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone as if it might somehow take back those awful words. My hands trembled as I gently put the phone down and stared at the blank television screen. My reflection stared back, a 64-year-old woman with graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a cardigan that had definitely seen better days. When had I become so invisible, so easily dismissed? The memories, they just came flooding back, as they always did whenever Marin reminded me of my place in their perfect little world. It hadn't always been this way, you know. When David was young, just the two of us after his father passed away, we were a real team. He'd help me set the table while I cooked our simple meals, and we'd talk about his day at school, his dreams, his little worries. But then came Marin. I remember the very first time he brought her home. She was 25, 5 years younger than David, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that cost more than my entire monthly grocery budget. She walked through my small apartment as if she were inspecting a crime scene, her nose wrinkling slightly as she took in my second-hand furniture and faded wallpaper. It's so quaint, she'd said, the word dripping with condescension. Very authentic vintage. David, bless his heart, had actually laughed, thinking it was a compliment. I knew better. The changes started small, almost imperceptibly. David began declining my dinner invitations because Marin preferred restaurants. He stopped calling as often because Marin thought he was too dependent on his mother. When they got engaged, I wasn't even asked to help plan the wedding. Marin's mother handled everything, she explained, because it was less complicated that way. I should have spoken up then. I should have fought for my place in my son's life. But I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law, the one who caused problems in their marriage. So, I stepped back, made myself smaller, hoped that my quiet compliance would earn me some affection, some respect. It never did. After they married, I became just an obligation. The woman they had to invite to holidays out of duty, not out of any real desire to have me there. I'd arrive with my homemade dishes, which often went largely untouched while everyone praised Marin's catered spreads. I'd offer to help, only to be told everything was under control. I'd try to connect with David, but Marin was always right there, steering conversations away from our shared memories toward topics that clearly excluded me. The worst part wasn't the exclusion itself. It was watching my son allow it to happen. David, the boy who used to curl up beside me when thunderstorms scared him, who'd insisted I read him one more story every single night, had grown into a man who sat silently while his wife treated me like hired help. I walked to my small kitchen and put the kettle on for tea, a comforting ritual that had seen me through countless difficult moments over the years. As I waited for the water to boil, I caught sight of my reflection. And as I poured the hot water over my tea bag, the store-brand kind, because the good stuff was just too expensive, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I picked up the phone and dialed David's number. "Mom." He sounded genuinely surprised. I rarely called him directly, having learned that Marin preferred to control all communication between us. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I just wanted to let you know that I won't be coming to Thanksgiving this year." The part of me that had been sleeping for far too long was finally starting to wake up. The letter arrived the very next morning, a Wednesday, in an expensive cream envelope with my name written in elegant script. I almost threw it away, assuming it was another charity solicitation, but something about the weight of the paper made me pause. The return address read Hayes and Associates, attorneys at law, from a firm in Hartford, Connecticut. My hands actually shook as I opened it. Nobody sends good news through lawyers, or so I thought. The letter stated that I was the sole beneficiary of the estate of Cordelia Ashford. Cordelia? My heart fluttered. Cordelia, my dearest friend from finishing school, whom I hadn't seen in over 40 years. The letter went on to explain that she had passed away peacefully in her sleep, leaving me everything: her villa in Switzerland, her investments, her entire fortune. I gasped. But why me? I asked the lawyer, Mr. Klaus, when he called later that day. Why not her family? Mrs. Ashford had no close family, he explained gently. And she greatly admired your courage. Courage? I had always seen myself as a woman who had made a foolish choice. When I told my wealthy, aristocratic parents I intended to marry David, a hard-working but humble man, they were horrified. My father threatened to disown me. My mother took to her bed with nervous exhaustion. The family lawyer explained, in terms I was too young and too in love to fully appreciate, exactly what I would be giving up. The Fairchild Trust was structured in a way that required family approval for inheritance. If I married outside our social circle, I would forfeit my claim to the family wealth, not just my inheritance, but my entire connection to the family legacy. I chose David. I chose love. And I never truly regretted it, but the cost had been immense. Cordelia never forgot your choice, Klaus continued. She said you were the bravest woman she ever knew. My voice came out as barely a whisper. Oh yes. She followed your life with great interest. When she learned you'd married for love and left the family, she said you were the bravest woman she'd ever known. She never married herself, he added, said she could never find a man worth giving up her independence for. Cordelia had been my closest friend during our finishing school years. We'd lost touch after my marriage, but apparently, she'd never forgotten me. The bequest was quite substantial. Substantial was truly an understatement. The letter detailed a magnificent villa overlooking Lake Geneva, a trust fund providing a monthly income that dwarfed my meager pension, and a staff to manage everything. My mind reeled. How could this be happening to me, a person who lived in a tiny apartment, not a grand villa? My phone rang, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. David's name appeared on the screen. Mom, what was that about yesterday? Marin's upset that you hung up on her. I didn't hang up on anyone, I said calmly. I simply told you I had other plans. What plans? You never have plans. The words stung because they were true. When had I become someone who never had plans? When had I accepted that my life was so empty, that my very existence was an apology, a pathetic relative who should be grateful for scraps of attention? No, they'd reminded me that I'd once been brave enough to choose my own path, even when it cost me everything I'd known. Maybe it was time to be that brave again. The plane touched down in Geneva on a crisp Monday morning, exactly 1 week after Marin's humiliating phone call. I pressed my face to the small window, watching the Swiss Alps emerge from the clouds like something from a fairy tale. My heart hammered against my ribs, a mixture of trepidation and exhilarating hope. Klaus, Cordelia's lawyer, met me at the airport. He was a kind, older gentleman with a gentle demeanor. As we drove, he spoke of Cordelia, of her deep admiration for me. I felt a blush creep up my neck. The thought of being pitied by my childhood friend made my cheeks burn. Mrs. Ashford was not pitying you, Klaus said gently, as if reading my thoughts. She was angry. Very angry. She said it was wrong that someone who had sacrificed so much for love should spend her golden years struggling. We turned through a set of iron gates, and my breath caught. Before us stood a magnificent stone villa, nestled amidst lush gardens, with sparkling Lake Geneva stretching out beyond it. It was breathtaking. Mrs. Hoffman, the villa's housekeeper, greeted me with a warm smile. She led me through grand rooms filled with antique furniture and priceless artwork, until we reached what had clearly been the master suite. The bedroom was enormous, with French doors opening onto a balcony that overlooked the lake. The bed was a beautiful four-poster antique, made up with linens that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but it was the writing desk by the window that made me gasp. Sitting on the polished wood surface was a framed photograph I hadn't seen in 45 years. Cordelia and me at finishing school, our arms around each other's shoulders, laughing at something long forgotten. Beside it lay a letter, written in Cordelia's familiar, elegant hand. "My dearest Mabel," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, but my spirit is with you. I have followed your life, my brave friend, and I have seen the sacrifices you made. It is my deepest wish that you finally live the life you deserve. This villa is yours, along with the investments that will provide you with an income of $15,000 per month for the rest of your life. Mrs. Hoffman knows all about managing the household and will teach you everything you need to know. Klaus will drive you wherever you need to go. All you have to do is live, truly live for the first time in decades. You are 64 years old, my dear friend. You have at least 20 good years ahead of you. Don't waste them being small to make other people comfortable. Be magnificent instead. All my love, Cordelia. P.S. I've also set up a photography studio for you." A photography studio? I hadn't touched a camera in decades. Mrs. Hoffman led me to a bright, airy room filled with light. Dozens of vintage and modern cameras were arranged in glass cases like precious jewels. "Mrs. Ashford said you were quite talented with photography as a girl," Mrs. Hoffman said, a gentle encouragement in her voice. "She hoped you might take it up again." I picked up a sleek digital camera, surprised by how familiar it felt in my hands, despite the decades since I'd held one. Through the studio windows, the Alps stretched endlessly, begging to be captured. "Mrs. Hoffman," I said, a spark igniting within me, "would Klaus be able to drive me into town today?" The next afternoon, after driving back to the villa, I asked Klaus to stop at a small cafe overlooking the lake. I ordered coffee and pastry, real pastry, mind you, not the store-bought cookies I'd been subsisting on, and pulled out one of Cordelia's cameras. The afternoon light was perfect, casting everything in a golden glow. I began taking pictures of the lake, the majestic mountains, the charming medieval buildings, the swans gliding gracefully across the water. With each click of the shutter, I felt more like myself, more alive than I'd been in years. I knew this was just the beginning. I had a lifetime of beauty to capture, a new life to embrace, maybe even start planning some changes to make the villa truly mine. But that night, I was simply grateful. Grateful for a friend who had never forgotten me. Grateful for a second chance I'd never expected. And grateful for the courage to take it. 3 weeks had passed since I'd arrived at the villa, and I was becoming someone I hadn't been in 45 years. Each morning, I woke in the four-poster bed with Lake Geneva sparkling outside my windows. And for a few precious moments, I couldn't quite believe it was real. I spent my days exploring the villa and its beautiful grounds, taking long, leisurely walks by the lake, and most importantly, rediscovering the sheer joy of photography, the joy of rediscovering my own eye for beauty. One afternoon, as I reviewed the day's photos on my laptop, I selected the most striking one, a close-up of frost-covered grapevines with the Alps in the background, and posted it to Facebook. As had become my habit, I added no explanation, no location tag, just the image itself. Within minutes, the comments began flooding in. "Mabel, this is absolutely breathtaking. Where did you take this? Are you traveling? When did you become such an amazing photographer? That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. I kept thinking about Cordelia's words, filtered through Mrs. Hoffman's gentle wisdom, self-betrayal. Is that what I'd been doing for years? Making myself smaller and smaller to avoid making others uncomfortable? The very next morning, I made a firm decision. I called the local photographer who had been recommended to me, a lovely young woman named Amelie who specialized in portrait photography. I'd like to have some professional photographs taken, I told her. Not for any special occasion, just for myself. A few days later, I posted one of Amelie's beautiful portraits to Facebook with a simple caption, "Embracing this beautiful season of life." The response was immediate and overwhelming. "Mabel, you look absolutely stunning. I barely recognize you. You look 20 years younger. Where are you? You look like you're living in a palace. Is this really you? You look like a completely different person." For the first time since I'd arrived in Switzerland, I actually responded to some of the comments. Thank you for the kind words. I'm discovering that life can be beautiful at any age. I felt a quiet satisfaction. I wasn't going to apologize for my good fortune, and I certainly didn't owe anyone the right to make me feel guilty for finally living well. Over the following days, I began posting more frequently, pictures of my morning coffee on the terrace, the fresh flowers Mrs. Hoffman arranged each day, the books I was reading in the library, and the delightful meals Klaus and I shared at charming local restaurants. I didn't caption them with long explanations or justifications. I simply shared moments of beauty and joy. The comments continued to pour in, but then, the private messages started. "Mom, Marin thinks you might be getting scammed. You know those online romance things where older people get taken advantage of? Have you been talking to someone online? Someone who's convinced you to spend money you don't have?" The implication hit me like a slap. In their minds, the only way poor, naive Mabel could suddenly be living well was if she was being deceived by criminals. "David," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "I am not being scammed. I am not delusional. I am happy. And frankly, it's about time you and Marin started to be a little worried about losing me instead of assuming I'll always be there to accept whatever scraps of attention you decide to throw my way." I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I'd just burned a bridge I'd spent decades trying to cross. But as I looked out at the lake glowing silver in the moonlight, I realized I didn't want to cross that bridge anymore. I wanted to build something new, something better, something worthy of the woman I was becoming. The next morning, 2 more messages from Marin appeared on my phone. The first, "Mabel, what is wrong with you? David is beside himself. You can't just disappear and post these ridiculous pictures without explaining yourself." The second message from her was even more revealing. "Look, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but David loves you. He's talking about flying to Switzerland to find you. Do you have any idea how much that would cost? Just call us back and explain what's happening." I set the phone down and walked to the French doors that opened onto my balcony. The morning mist was lifting from Lake Geneva, revealing the majestic mountains beyond. I took a deep, steadying breath. I had a new life, and it was time to live it fully. I decided to learn to bake. Mrs. Hoffman introduced me to Magnofi, the villa's chef, a cheerful woman who patiently taught me the art of making croissants from simple ingredients. "Magnifique!" Ori exclaimed as my croissants emerged from the oven, golden and perfectly flaky. "You have natural talent, madam." I photographed the croissants on the marble countertop with the morning light streaming through the kitchen windows. The image was simple but elegant, the golden pastries, a cup of coffee in fine porcelain, and in the background, a glimpse of the lake through the window. I posted the photo with a caption, "Learning new skills at any age brings joy. Never stop growing." I knew it was a subtle message to David, a quiet lament for the years allowing that relationship to deteriorate through neglect and disrespect. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, with a local area code from home. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Prescott, this is Officer Martinez with the local police department. Your son filed a welfare check request. He's concerned that you might be missing or in danger." My heart stopped. "I'm not missing, officer. I'm traveling. I understand that, ma'am, but your son says you're unreachable. I sighed. Officer, I assure you, I am perfectly safe and quite capable of managing my own affairs. Sometimes the only way to stop the speculation is to show them the reality. That evening, I finally called David back. He answered on the first ring. Mom, thank God. Where are you? Are you okay? We've been going crazy with worry. I'm fine, David. I'm in Switzerland. Switzerland? How did you get to Switzerland? Mom, the police called today. I had to file a welfare check because you weren't answering your phone. I closed my eyes, trying to find the patience. David, why is it so hard for you to believe that I might be happy, that I might be living well, that you'd rather believe I'm being victimized by criminals? That's not it, Mom. We just want to make sure you're safe. You want to make sure I'm still the same pitiful woman who accepts being treated like hired help at family gatherings. You want me to go back to my tiny apartment and my careful budgeting and my grateful acceptance of whatever scraps of attention you decide to throw my way. Mom, please. I'm going to send you the address of the villa. Look up the property records. That place is worth millions. I'm so confused about what's happening, he said, his voice a mixture of bewilderment and awe. But the most telling message came from Marin herself. I don't know what kind of con you're running, but David deserves better than a mother who disappears and then threatens to cut him off. You're being selfish and cruel. I stared at that message for a long time. Selfish and cruel for living well? For being happy? For refusing to accept poor treatment? I screenshotted the message and saved it. Christmas approached, and I decided to host a small, intimate dinner at the villa with Klaus and Mrs. Hoffman. The villa was decorated beautifully, and the atmosphere was filled with genuine warmth and laughter. This feels like the first real Christmas I've had in decades, I confessed to Mrs. Hoffman. She smiled knowingly. Mrs. Ashford used to say that the holidays revealed the truth about relationships. The people who truly love you want you to be happy. The others want you to be useful. That wisdom proved prophetic when my phone rang on December 23rd. David's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. Mom. He began, his voice thick with emotion. Mom, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you. God, I don't even know where to start. The way we treated you, the way I let Marin talk to you, the way I just assumed you'd always be there no matter how little effort I put in. It was wrong. It was all wrong. Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of a burden finally being acknowledged. What changed your mind? I asked quietly. Honestly, Mom? Seeing those pictures. And Marin's reaction. She was furious, and I finally saw her for who she really was. I finally saw what she was doing to you, and to us. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have stood up to her. The admission hung between us, raw and honest. Where do we go from here? He asked. That depends on what you want, and what you're willing to change. I want my mother back, the real one, not the diminished version we created. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn that. Even if it means setting boundaries with your wife? Especially if it means that. That evening, I called Klaus into the salon. Klaus, I'd like to extend an invitation to my son to visit in the new year. I want him to see me, truly see me, as I am now. David arrived in Switzerland in mid-January, looking nervous and uncertain as Klaus drove him up the winding road to the villa. I watched from the window as he stepped out of the car and stood for a moment, just staring up at the ivy-covered stone walls and elegant windows. When Mrs. Hoffman led him into the salon where I was waiting, his eyes were wide with amazement. Mom, he said, and his voice broke slightly. This is incredible. I stood to embrace him. A long, silent hug, filled with years of unspoken words. We spent the next few days talking, truly talking, for the first time in ages. I showed him the photography studio, the beautiful gardens, the sparkling lake. He listened, he asked questions, and he finally saw me, not as a burden, but as a woman who had found her own strength and joy. As he prepared to leave, he said, Mom, I know I can't undo the past. But I hope you'll come back to visit sometimes, not to the old life, but just to visit. I want to show people who my mother really is." "I'll think about it," I said. "But David, you need to understand. This is my home now. This is where I belong." "I know. And I'm happy for you. Really happy." As Klaus drove him to the airport the next morning, I felt a peace I'd never experienced before. I'd reclaimed my relationship with my son, but on my own terms. I'd set boundaries and held them. I'd rediscovered myself. Cordelia had said I had at least 20 good years ahead of me when she left me this gift, and I intended to live every single one of them magnificently. Outside my windows, Lake Geneva stretched endlessly toward the horizon, reflecting the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere across the ocean, there was a Thanksgiving table where my absence had once been mandated, where I'd been told I could wash the dishes if I wanted to participate. But here, in my beautiful home by the lake, I was truly free.